Ridley Scott directed two of my favorite films of all time, Alien and Blade Runner, back to back. Then he followed up that cinema-defining 1-2 punch with the film equivalent of a limp handshake, Legend, the movie where the devil wants to kill a pair of unicorns until he gets distracted by a 16-year-old girl. Despite the gray in my beard, I was not actually alive when Legend was released in 1985, nor did I grow up watching it, which is why I can say that the film is a complete mess.
Garbage! A great towering mountain of slop!
If you remember loving Legend as a kid, I expect what you're remembering are the things that actually do work about the movie. The gorgeous production design, the lush cinematography, and the dreamy and atmospheric score by Tangerine Dream. At least in the theatrical cut. The director's cut has an entirely different score. But as a writer, my priority when I'm watching a film is typically the story. And unfortunately for Legend, story is its biggest weakness. It's messy, confusing, overly simplified in one area, and then unnecessarily complicated in the next. And not in an intentionally abstract way, but rather in the way that you can tell something went wrong during production or post-production. This possible derailment of the film is further suggested by the existence of three different versions of the movie. There's the US theatrical cut, the European theatrical cut, and the director's cut, which was released 17 years later. I'm sort of a fixer, so when I watch a movie that doesn't quite work, I can't help but wonder what would have been different. So when a film presents me with actual alternate versions of itself, I can't help but watch them. That was a real problem when I discovered the existence of fan edits. I think I've seen like 9 different versions of The Phantom Menace. This compulsion doesn't apply to films without redeeming qualities, though. No amount of editing can save a film that just fundamentally doesn't work. So what about Legend? Can it be saved by the edit?
Some simple conversation.
I have nothing to talk about.
I'd say the most debated change between the US and European theatrical cuts is the score. The European version was released with the original score by Jerry Goldsmith, whose catalog includes the original Planet of the Apes, Chinatown, and Ridley Scott's own Alien. For the US version, Goldsmith's score was replaced entirely by a brand new score from Tangerine Dream, the German electronic group that actually scored Tom Cruise's movie Risky Business 2 years before. Despite only having 4 additional minutes of runtime, the European theatrical version has numerous scenes and moments that were either changed or replaced entirely in the US theatrical cut. The later director's cut has a lot more in common with the European theatrical version, but takes it way further, adding a whole other 20 minutes of runtime. With the US theatrical cut and the director's cut being the two most distinct versions of the film, I think they offer the best comparison point for how much a film's story can be changed in the edit. From pacing to shot selection to new ADR to the addition or exclusion of entirely different scenes. So let's start with the US theatrical cut, which I'm just going to refer to as the theatrical cut from here on out to save myself some breath. This version has its fans. Some people adore and swear by this version. And if you're one of them, I apologize in advance. But I will admit, the cinematography, production design, and Tangerine Dream score are all phenomenal. Those aren't the problem. They're just having to do all of the heavy lifting. This video contains full spoilers for both the theatrical and director's cuts of Legend, and probably any future cuts as well. So quick disclaimer, it's not my intention to criticize or lay blame on any one specific person for the problems with Legend's story. Even the screenwriter. Filmmaking is a collaborative process, and there's so many elements that come together to tell the film's story. So there's not really a fair way to lay blame on one person, even if I wanted to. Filmmaking is hard, and honestly, it's a miracle that any film works. That said, the theatrical cut of Legend goes wrong right from the beginning. The opening text crawl is egregiously long. And it doesn't help that it's followed up 4 minutes later by dialogue explaining the very same thing that it just droned on about. Basically, it's taken 170 words to say that unicorns are magic and darkness is evil, which are two things that the film very clearly conveys. My hot take is that 99% of opening text crawls and even opening voiceover narrations are completely unnecessary. It's kind of an immediate red flag that somebody behind the film either didn't have enough faith in the audience or in the film's ability to tell its own story. Seeing as this text crawl is only in the US theatrical cut, and based on some comments Ridley Scott made that I'll get to later, I think I'm right that this is coming from a place of insecurity. After the opening text crawl, we meet Darkness, played wonderfully by Tim Curry, seen here with glow-in-the-dark fingernails. Most people will agree that he's a highlight of the movie. This is where we get the opening text crawl re-explained to us, but this time in dialogue, as Darkness tasks his goblin underling Blix with killing a pair of unicorns, which will free Darkness from living in the shadows and allow him to rule the world. An important detail you'll want to remember here is that Darkness explicitly tells Blix that the only way to lure a unicorn is with innocence. I don't think opening the film in Darkness's domain is a good way to introduce us to this fantasy world. It would be like opening the Fellowship of the Ring in Mordor instead of the Shire. A major point of this movie is that Darkness is returning to the world, so it's kind of a weak choice for us to see Darkness first before we even know what the normal world looks like. We see the normal world next, at the same time we meet Lily, the innocent maiden or princess, depending on the cut of the film, played by Mia Sara, Ferris Bueller's girlfriend. The whiplash between Darkness and Lily makes it clear right away that this film deals in wild hyperbole. He is evil and she is innocence. At least that's what the film thinks she is, sometimes. Well, we'll get to that. Most of the film takes place in either the forest or Darkness's domain, but Lily does briefly visit a village on, I guess, the edge of the forest that is very Shire-coded. It bothers me that we never see where Lily is from. It's like she exists without context. She alludes to living in a palace, but of course we never see it. And she only has on-screen relationships with two characters, neither of whom are from where she's from. There's this random hobbit-coded woman in the village that's apparently just one home. And then there's Jack, the wild boy of the forest. If you're familiar with Mowgli or Tarzan, Jack is that, with all of the details scrubbed off. Most of the casting in this film is actually pretty good. I think Mia Sara acts her little heart out, and Tim Curry is a highlight for most people. But you could argue that maybe Tom Cruise was miscast. Like, if you're already familiar with Tom Cruise's later career, going back and watching this movie is a little bit jarring, but I don't think that has anything to do with the performance he's actually giving in this movie. Just like Lily, Jack exists with little to no context. Ridley Scott has said this movie was meant to be a fairy tale, and it is true to fairy tales to characterize rather vaguely or shallowly. But the problem is, fairy tales are short. And when you're adapting one into an hour-and-a-half or 2-hour movie, that level of characterization just doesn't hold up. The lead up to the inciting incident of this film is very Adam and Eve coded, with Jack being the perfect innocent in tune with his forest Eden, and Lily being the less innocent second to arrive, whose mistake corrupts the garden. If you were assuming that Lily, being the innocent maiden, was the personification of innocence in this film, that would be fair because it is how she was introduced, but you'd also be wrong. I think. I'm not sure that this cut of the film knows what it's trying to say about Lily. The opening text crawl identifies Jack as the quote-unquote innocent, but the edit heavily suggests Lily is the innocence meant to lure the unicorns.
Innocence. Innocence.
But it's Jack who takes her to the unicorns. So he's the innocent that knows about them and knows where to find them. And Lily is portrayed as precocious and willful right from the jump.
Oh, bloomin' fairies.
This lack of clarity is probably one of the reasons the opening text crawl was added, which only reinforces my opinion about them that they're there to clear up mistakes. When Jack does lead Lily to the unicorns, Darkness's goblins follow them. And the sequence of events from there is chaotic and disorienting. It's like 3 inciting incidents happening at the same time. It's unclear what is meant to cause what. It's kind of like music video logic. It's more vibes than reason. Here's what we literally see on screen. The goblins follow Jack and Lily to the unicorns. Lily interacts with one despite Jack's protests. Jack walks away mad. The goblins shoot a unicorn with a dart that either kills it slowly or slows it down or puts it to sleep. Lily doesn't even notice the dart and just thinks the unicorn got spooked and ran away. This means that our lead characters, Jack and Lily, literally misunderstand the inciting incident. Lily gets to overhear some goblins gossiping later that kind of explains it a little bit, but Jack doesn't. So he spends the entire movie not actually knowing what happened and incorrectly blaming Lily. Then Lily and Jack very quickly make up while the goblins chase down the unicorn. Lily, unprompted, comes up with the idea to take her ring off and throw it into a lake, saying that whoever retrieves her ring will get to marry her. Then Jack immediately jumps into the lake to get it. But Lily's like distraught about it. Like, I thought this was her idea. Like, she just invented this game. While Jack is underwater, the entire world begins to descend into darkness. Lily is screaming and wailing for him. Her motivations or understanding of the situation completely unclear. What's causing this descent into darkness? Possibly the unicorn slowly dying, if that is what the dart did. I have my doubts, though, because the descent into darkness isn't complete until the goblin Blix chops off the unicorn's horn. So did the dart kill the unicorn, or did losing its horn? The weather change would suggest that the dart did, but at the end of the film, the unicorn is brought back to life by reattaching its horn. So I guess losing its horn killed it. Then why was the weather changing before it lost its horn? Anyway, Jack returns to the surface of the lake to find the world frozen over. He's already screaming for Lily the second he surfaces. Motivations unclear. But Lily inexplicably ran away just a few seconds earlier. Motivations unclear. I could repeat that phrase 100 times in this review because these characters do not behave in ways that make any sense. Their emotions and motivations change so rapidly, it's disorienting. They're not really characters as much as puppets, just behaving in whatever way their masters tell them to in that moment. Okay, so now that the forest is in darkness and Jack and Lily are separated, Jack meets a gang of forest creatures. We've got Frankie Muniz from Malcolm in the Middle, Tinkerbell, and 2 of the 7 dwarves, Sleepy and Happy. But seriously, these 2, I don't know. I don't know what's happening with them. This movie apes so much from Lord of the Rings that I'm assuming they're meant to be dwarves, but neither of them gets anywhere close to enough characterization for us to know anything about them. They're kind of there for slapstick comedy bits. Tinkerbell and Malcolm in the Middle are pretty significant supporting characters, though, so I'll show them the respect of using their actual names. Una and
Honeythorn Gump, at your service.
I have the idea that at some point this film was meant to be kind of a fish out of water story, like a lot of fantasy adventures are, but then Jack doesn't make sense as the protagonist because he's a child of the forest. The screenplay even seems to be aware of this problem.
You be a forest child and not know the gum?
If they wanted a fish out of water story about a clueless innocent navigating a dangerous fantasy world, just like The Hobbit that they're very clearly aping, then Lily should have been their protagonist, not Jack. She's the one who's a tourist in this world and everything should be new to her. Jack admits that he let Lily meet the unicorns and Gump gets mad until Jack says that he did it for love. And then Gump is like, oh, nah, we cool then. Let's all be best friends and go on a journey together. They go to find the unicorns and see that one is dead. Jack has a moment with the living unicorn who must be able to communicate telepathically with him because suddenly Jack now knows that the horn was stolen and that they need to get it back and that they need a champion. This exposition is divinely delivered because it literally comes from nowhere. So then they say Jack's the champion. Okay, sure. And then they send him into a cave to stock up on inventory. Shockingly, I don't actually have that much of an issue with this scene. I guess I've just played enough video games for this to work for me. But it would have made a little more sense if we knew literally anything else about the outside world. Like, we didn't know swords existed until he finds one in this cave. And then Una reveals herself to be able to transform into a very creepy little girl. She looks like Gozer's daughter. And Ghostbusters came out like a year before this, so maybe there was some cross-pollination in the costume department. And then we go back to Darkness's goblin errand boy, Blix, who is way overpresent in this film. He definitely gets more screen time than Darkness, but he may even have more screen time than Lily up until at least the midpoint of this film. Blix is basically our antagonist for the majority of the movie, and then he just disappears. Like, I do not know what happened to Blix. He's just gone from the movie about 2/3 of the way in, and we never see him again. I also think most people agree that Darkness, Tim Curry's performance as Darkness, is the strongest asset of this movie. So hiding him and putting him off in favor of this random goblin for the majority of the film, it's a very strange choice. This movie is also just making up its lore as it goes along. Like, when they killed the first unicorn, the world descended into darkness. But then Darkness, the man, not the concept, Darkness tells Blix that as long as one unicorn lives, then the sun will continue to rise and set. But that's not what we saw happen on screen. So this is probably as good a time as any to point out that Darkness literally makes Blix do everything for him in this movie. Like, his big plan to take over the world is to have somebody else do it. We do actually get to see Darkness do something in this scene, though, when he makes this corpse come to life and drag this random goblin away. That's kind of cool. Okay, another thing that bothers me, everybody in this movie that isn't a human has a silly voice. Like, the ratio of silly voices to normal voices is way too high.
Here's to Jack. A little sassafras.
Wouldn't that be magic?
Magic horn is mine.
That's one spot on arrow will do no harm.
Sour-tasting fairy!
You shouldn't talk like that.
I think too many people thought they were the comic relief in the movie, which is a directing problem, not a writing problem. Lily has basically been running around in the snow since the last time we saw her, eavesdropping on goblin conversations. She finally runs into one of the dwarves, who's just hanging out with the last living unicorn for some reason, only for her and the unicorn to immediately get caught by the goblins. The dwarf tells Jack and the rest of the gang what happened, so they set off for Darkness's lair. Since this is every fantasy story combined into one, they have to cross a swamp to get there. I don't know why, but the swamp hag feels like the first time anything interesting happens in this movie. I think it's because she's the first obstacle they encounter that isn't like a minion of Darkness. So it just feels a little more, I don't know, like it's of the world. It's like we actually get to see and learn about the world, and it adds some color and interest to it, even though it comes and goes in like a minute. I'll point out again that the production design is never not great. It's just consistently awesome throughout this movie. So Jack and his friends fall into a jail inside Darkness's lair, and inside they find the little goblin that got dragged away by the corpse. But it turns out, surprise, he was a dwarf? That's kind of interesting. Like, what's up with that?
It's a long story. Doesn't matter now anyway.
Seriously. That's all we're gonna get. The gang tries to convince Una to help them out, but she is temperamental and aloof. It's actually a great way to characterize a fairy. She wants a kiss from Jack, but he's saving all of his kisses for Lily, I guess, even if it means his life and the lives of his friends. So Una gets mad. I find Una like legitimately scary, like more so than Darkness. But she frees the gang anyway, and they move on. Okay, so we're 52 minutes in, have barely seen Darkness, and he's in the middle of another soliloquy to his fireplace when all of a sudden he drops,
Father.
Father? Who the hell is your father, dude? You were like very clearly the devil. Like your dad is the fireplace or the furniture? I find this frustrating because I just genuinely don't know why that detail is there. It's another huge storytelling problem that the antagonist's entire motivation changes like 2/3 of the way through the movie. Darkness suddenly no longer cares about killing the last unicorn, even though that was the whole point of this movie. Now his only interest is banging this random teenage girl he happened upon. We're approaching my favorite part of this movie, and you can already start to see the music video aesthetic take over. This is where the movie's lack of clarity and cohesion actually kind of work in its favor. It is the single best sequence in the movie, and it's the one moment that kind of makes the whole thing worthwhile. We get this dance number between Lily and a dress. It is incredible visual storytelling. Without any dialogue, we see this perfect visual representation of Lily being seduced and overcome by darkness, ending with her and the dress becoming one. Scott is on record as citing Fantasia as an influence of this movie, and this is the moment where that is very obvious. This sequence is marred only slightly by Darkness's fireplace daddy saying, "Make her one of us," which, like, yeah, dude, we get it. That's the subtext. Also, I like this moving baby statue. When Darkness finally reappears, he has thankfully dropped his glow-in-the-dark fingernails. But then he begins putting the moves on Lily. This scene is creepy and intentionally so, I think, but it has a odd history. Let's just say there are a lot of people online, often women and often bisexual, who maybe had some kind of awakening to this scene. This scene is a little challenging today, though. Mia Sara turned 17 a week before she finished principal photography on this movie, and I'm pretty confident this is a dress no actress under the age of 18 would ever wear in a modern film or TV show. I'm no Puritan, but I also don't want to exploit for YouTube views a decision that an actress or her parents made 40 years ago when she was underage. So we're going to give her a nice little shirt. Some of Darkness's flirtation is like genuinely funny. I don't know if it's intentional, but I laugh every time he's like trying to play it cool.
Sit.
Yes.
I prefer to stand.
Sit! Or stand. As you wish.
Then Darkness says dreams are his specialty.
Through dreams, I influence mankind.
That's a great idea, but it's a shame it literally doesn't happen in this movie. Like, that would have improved Lily's motivations earlier in the film if Darkness had been like influencing her from a distance and he was the one that kind of motivated her to touch the unicorn. But then again, touching the unicorn also didn't matter. The film just thinks it did. In a version of the movie where Lily touching the unicorn actually mattered, then having Darkness influence Lily like Dracula influenced Mina would have been a vast improvement and actually tied together Darkness's currently two very separate motivations. So my battery died and I had to take a break. And in the meantime, it started getting dark outside and started snowing. So it's like talking negatively about this movie is like the real world equivalent of killing a unicorn. And now Darkness is descending upon me. So at this point in the movie, Darkness has been keeping the last living unicorn alive just to, give the heroes time to save her. I'd like to point out that he was content to have his goblin minion kill the first unicorn, but now the second unicorn has to be this whole production with a big speech, like anything to not kill it. This is legitimately a joke from Austin Powers. Like, just kill the unicorn, dude, and then woo your jailbait. Lily has a refreshing moment of agency where she tricks Darkness into letting her be the one to execute the unicorn. But Jack trusting her in that moment and going against what Gump says and having faith that Lily is still good doesn't really feel earned. Like the last time Jack saw Lily, she specifically went against what he said and violated her trust. And they never really addressed that. So I feel like the movie's just missing a moment, but whatever, it pays off. She doesn't kill the unicorn. The good guys win. The stunt work and choreography in the final fight scene is pretty poor in both the theatrical and director's cuts. Both cuts try to make it work by selectively applying slow motion, but I don't know if it helps. It seems like they just couldn't get the footage on set. I know Tim Curry had a hard time with all the prosthetics, so it probably came down to him just not being able to do the physical acting. The end result is a pretty underwhelming fight scene between Darkness and Jack. Lily is asleep now for some reason, because the film just wanted a Sleeping Beauty moment. So they return to the thawed out forest. Jack retrieves the ring from the bottom of the lake, puts it on Lily's finger, and they kiss, which by fairy tale rules means she wakes up. Jack and the gang go their separate ways, but the "don't forget about me" moment with Gump,
But don't forget us. Never.
is just as bizarre as his introduction, because Gump's acknowledging Jack will never see him again, which goes against their first meeting when he acted like Jack should have already known who he was. And that's the end. So what did we learn? Fairy tales are supposed to have morals, right? What's the moral of Legend? Don't touch unicorns. Listen to your boyfriend. I just did a lot of complaining about a movie a lot of people love. If you're one of those people, thank you for bearing with me. But I'm not the only one who has problems with this movie. It was not well received when it was released in theaters. I like this New York Times review from Vincent Canby from 1986, where he wrote that the look of the film keeps the eye busier than the mind or the heart. I think that's how I feel about the theatrical cut. Like it's sort of a turn your brain off movie and just let the vibes wash over you. So that's usually the end of the story. A movie doesn't quite work. You wash your hands of it and you move on. Alternate versions of movies are relatively rare. Edited for TV movies were a big thing in the 90s. There was the deleted scene and alternate ending craze of the DVD era in the 2000s. I already mentioned I'm a big fan of fan edits, but those are a little bit niche and sometimes hard to find and access. But there's something about a director's cut that makes it seem more official than any of those other alternate versions. Most of the time when you hear about the existence of a director's cut, the assumption is that somebody got in the way of the original film. Like a producer or the studio demanded changes and ended up, mutilating some perfect version of the movie that now is being resurrected by a director's cut. But in the case of Legend, it was actually Ridley Scott who did the mutilating. When test screenings of his original version didn't go well, Ridley Scott overreacted and chopped the movie up into what we now know as the theatrical cut. He's admitted in interviews that he, quote, got totally paranoid during post-production. Scott ultimately regretted the edits and changes he made in that paranoid state of mind. So 17 years later, his attempts to fix those mistakes resulted in a director's cut that's nearly 25 minutes longer than the original US theatrical release and paints a very different version of the story. The director's cut scores an early win with me by dropping the opening text crawl. That's a clear example of addition by subtraction. The director's cut still makes the mistake of introducing the goblins and Darkness too quickly, so that's not fixed. But Darkness's opening soliloquy is now off screen, which is a plus. This cut also makes the decision to hide Darkness's face until he first appears to Lily much later in the movie, and I think that's a good idea. It builds a sense of anticipation and dread. Disappointingly, it's already obvious a few minutes into this cut that it too doesn't really understand the story it's trying to tell. Darkness narrates to us in his soliloquy that
I require the solace of the shadows and the dark of the night. Sunshine is my destroyer. All this shall change. Tonight, the sun sets forever.
great. You're making the villain's intentions and the stakes clear right from the beginning. But then Blix enters and Darkness tells him,
Something troubles me. I feel a presence in the forest. A force I had mercifully almost forgotten. Looking upon these frail creatures, one would not think that they could contain such power. One could rule the universe with it.
So let me get this straight. Darkness has been confined to the shadows because Sunshine is his destroyer. Okay. Sunshine is caused by or dependent upon the existence of unicorns. Sure. Darkness says that with the power contained inside of a unicorn, one could, quote, rule the universe. So killing these two creatures offers a 180-degree reversal in his fortunes. Yet somehow he had, quote, almost forgotten they existed until presumably very recently, and not prompted by anything in the film, he felt their presence in the forest. Even if we just accept that Darkness now remembers the one thing he has to do to go from confinement to Lord of the Universe, his big plan, the plan he's soliloquizing about, and the plan that's going to change everything for him after millennia in confinement, his big plan is to just have a goblin do it for him.
You must find them for me and destroy them.
The foundations of this movie's plot are just so feeble. Moving past that, we have the introduction of Lily as Innocence again.
Innocence. Innocence.
Even though I'm fairly sure the narrative means to define Jack as the embodiment of innocence, not Lily. I mean, in both cuts, Jack is the one who leads Lily to the unicorns, not the other way around. I like Lily's singing, though. It feels very classical fairy tale. They also added a second human to the Shire, which is twice as many as we had last time. I didn't mention this weird vision of the future that Lily gets inside the one house, but it's in both cuts of the film. Maybe this is supposed to be Darkness's way of communicating with her, but it doesn't really lead anywhere or do anything. Interestingly, this cut of the film establishes that Lily is a princess and talks about her father, which is like 100% more than we knew about her in the theatrical cut. The Hobbit's line,
"You should be out looking for a handsome prince on a white charger,"
also better sets up the contest between her suitors, Jack and Darkness, which in hindsight, I guess is what was happening in the theatrical cut. Jack is way more of a feral Tarzan boy in this cut, which I'd say is an improvement. He can now speak to animals, which is pretty cool, and he's teaching Lily to do it as well. Jack and Lily's relationship is also much clearer in this cut. They're not boyfriend and girlfriend like in the theatrical cut. Their kissing scene is cut, and they're way more innocent and just beginning to navigate their feelings for each other. Lily's decision to interact with the unicorns also comes across differently in this cut. Like she's motivated more by willful defiance than innocent curiosity. I guess that works better for her corruption arc, especially when Jack says,
"These are sacred animals."
And she says,
"I don't care."
And he says,
"You risk your immortal soul talking like that."
Which is dialogue that was in the theatrical cut, but has actually been rearranged to make her more flippant. But these details also contradict the idea that she's innocence incarnate, which, again, if she's not, then she was not a necessary part of the plan to kill the unicorns. While Lily's interaction with the unicorn works a little bit better in this cut, with her singing to calm the unicorns, my main gripe with this plot point remains, which is that it is in no way Lily's fault that this unicorn gets killed. Jack leads her to the unicorns. The goblins follow them. The goblins already have the unicorns in their sight before Lily even approaches one, so they can take the shot at any time. All Lily interacting with the unicorns does is make it slightly easier for the goblins, but they definitely could have done it without her. The director's cut almost fixes this insane sequence of cause and effect around the inciting incident just by giving each beat more time to breathe and not intercutting between them in a way that tries to tie unrelated events together. For instance, it actually gives Jack and Lily a moment to make up, where she sings to him and gives him a kiss on the cheek. But it still makes Jack diving into the water an act of dire significance when it absolutely isn't, and has nothing to do with what's happening to the unicorn. I just think all of this insane drama with the weather change would have been more effective if Jack and Lily actually knew what the hell was happening. I have this suspicion that the visual idea of Jack swimming underwater as the lake freezes over was an early idea that the filmmakers held onto and kind of forced into the narrative. Making that moment happen kind of complicates everything else. Like, in order for that moment to happen, Jack and Lily have to misunderstand what happens with the unicorn, not know that it's injured or dying, go off somewhere else and have a separate moment that then leads to him being underwater when the effects of the unicorn dying occur. So it's just a lot of work to make this one idea happen that would suggest to me somebody just really loved this visual. It's still so lame for us to only see one house with one awake character and then have Lily return to that same house to find that character frozen, and then have the goblins enter that same house later. I let this slide in the theatrical cut, but seeing it twice just pisses me off. Like, why is there one house in this world? When the goblins want to check and see if the human world has frozen over, they're like, let's go to the house, guys. Honeythorn Gump's introduction is improved in this cut. He's way more mysterious and supernatural and threatening. He comes across far more fairy-like with their typical amorality. It also makes way more sense for Gump and the gang to join up with Jack after he successfully answers Gump's riddle than it did for them to join Jack because Jack's in love. Even the following beat is clearer.
But first we must see that no harms come to the unicorn.
It makes sense that the first thing the gang would want to do is check on the unicorns. They do that in the theatrical cut too. But it's unclear why, because the lead up to that moment is butchered in the theatrical edit. Jack getting scolded by the remaining unicorn is also a great change and good motivator for his journey beyond just saving Lily. This scene can only happen because this cut established earlier that Jack has an ability to talk to animals. So the director's cut takes that same scene and extends the shots of the unicorn, emphasizing its braying and stamping as communicating with Jack. I already liked the swamp hag scene in the theatrical cut, but the director's cut improves it significantly. Jack now has to use his wits, and he tricks the swamp hag into getting distracted by her own reflection in the kind of mirrored surface of his shield, which is actually great foreshadowing for their plan later to use the dinner plates to create the chain reaction of reflections. And then Jack also has to use his sword, and he's clumsy and uncomfortable with it because he's never really used it before. And then after he's successful, he's surprised by his own heroism. Like, it's a great moment and kind of a pivotal one on his journey to becoming a hero. This plot point where we reveal one of the goblins was actually a dwarf is in both cuts, though it gets a tiny bit more room to breathe in the director's cut. I still like the idea of it because it implies a Smeagol-like character arc, but it just doesn't feel earned in Legend. Like, we don't know what these dwarf characters' lives are supposed to be like because everyone we meet feels like an exception to the rule. So the fact that one of them was hanging out with goblins, I don't know what the significance of that is. Cutting Jack and Lily's kiss from the first act makes Una's temptation of Jack so much better. He loves Lily, but he's never kissed her before. So this is a genuine moral quandary for him. The jail scene being genuinely scary is another director's cut improvement. It's down to the score and just giving the scene enough room to breathe that it develops real tension. I'm sure you're getting tired of me saying how much every scene benefits from being given room to breathe, but it is frankly amazing how much this cut improves just every moment by not rushing through it and chopping it up into its bare minimum essentials. I'm very disappointed to hear the father soliloquy is still here. I still don't get it. That's something that could have been fixed very easily in the edit. Darkness is also still completely distracted from his opportunity to seize ultimate power by the presence of a 16-year-old girl. But that's not really something that can be fixed in an edit because it's too baked into the film. By this point in the movie, I was ready to say that the Goldsmith score was objectively better than the Tangerine Dream score. But then I got to the dancing dress scene. What was my absolute favorite sequence in the theatrical cut became my biggest disappointment in the director's cut. In this case, more footage meant more opportunities to see the dancer's head, which hurts the illusion of the dress dancing. And the Goldsmith score here lacks the wonder and dreamlike quality of the Tangerine Dream score. It is a pretty significant downgrade. The dinner plate gathering, tossing, slapstick doesn't really work in either cut. It's silly at a time when the movie should be tense. We're literally rising to the climax and we're doing hijinks. In the director's cut, they added silly little sound effects every time they toss a plate, which only makes things worse. The Goldsmith score is better during the fight scene with the S&M chefs, but the whole sequence is still too long and feels like filler. Darkness trying to seduce Lily is largely the same as in the theatrical cut, but there's this added bit where he really wants her to sit in this strange, malevolent chair. To be honest, that chair looks pretty uncomfortable. I wouldn't want to sit on it. Sleepy being asleep on the job is a deeply annoying plot point to me. It's in the theatrical cut, but the director's cut drags it out and keeps cutting back to it the entire fight scene between Jack and Darkness, so it just makes it so much more aggravating. The ending of the director's cut is interesting. It's less euphoric, more ambiguous. Jack and Lily aren't just together forever. He gives her the ring. They have their first kiss. She wakes up, but then she gives him back the ring and tells him he belongs in the forest, but that she'll come back tomorrow. And Jack gets the goodbye with the rest of the cast without Lily. The director's cut also doesn't show the unicorn getting its horn back, which is a terrible change. No excuses. That absolutely needed to happen. Overall, the director's cut improves a lot. It's not perfect, but for the most part, character motivations are clearer. Characters actually have arcs and grow and change. The Goldsmith score is better in a lot of places, but worse in others. And there are a few edits and changes that were actually better in the theatrical cut. I think the best version of Legend exists somewhere between the theatrical and the director's cut. But if you could only watch one, I would recommend the director's cut. I have to confess something. I lied earlier when I said there were 3 cuts of Legend: the US theatrical, the European theatrical, and the director's cut. There actually is a 4th cut of Legend. It's not available anywhere you can watch it, at least that I could find, and I've never seen it. But there are people online who swear to its existence. Now, back in the day of broadcast television, if you wanted to air a movie on TV, you had to edit it to make it fit a specific time slot, as well as numerous commercial breaks. That process usually resulted in an uglier version of a film with really awkwardly timed breaks. But in the case of Legend, there was a version that aired on TV that apparently combined both the European theatrical cut and the US theatrical cut, taking scenes and moments that worked better from the European version and adding the Tangerine Dream score from the theatrical and melding it together into what is the best of both worlds. I love the idea of some TV station employee being given a task that could have been just a hack job and instead using it as an opportunity to improve a film. That is a person after my own heart. Even though the TV version isn't available to watch anywhere, some people remember it so fondly that they've actually made attempts to recreate it from memory, cobbling together pieces from the versions we do have available. It's a rare sort of film that inspires that kind of loyalty. So there's something about Legend that makes its fans and even its director want to keep trying to fix it. Like if they just keep digging, they might find that perfect version of it somewhere under the surface. But a director's cut, just like any alternate cut or fan edit, can only work with what footage exists. If something wasn't captured on set, or if what was captured on set just didn't come out for any number of reasons, bad performance, continuity issues, editing isn't some magic fix-all. And only one director in history has ever been given tens of millions of dollars to go back years later and shoot hours of new footage for their director's cut. Typically, what can't be fixed in the edit and can't be blamed on production issues comes down to the screenplay. That's why I'd like to make a video about Legend's screenplay from its first draft all the way to its shooting draft. But I'm not sure if that's something anybody's interested in. So if that does sound like something you'd want to see from me, please let me know in the comments. Regardless, my plan is to keep making videos that analyze stories in movie, TV, and even literature. So if that sounds interesting to you, I'd love for you to subscribe. See you next time.